Many of us, from time to time, when we're still enough to notice, realise that we're not living up to all that we can be. We like to blame it on lack of money or lack of time, opportunities, connections, intelligence, even good looks. But in my work as a leadership facilitator and coach, and in dealing with myself, I see a much more insidious reason at play. You see, the reason that I haven't always lived up to my potential, that I haven't shown up fully in all I am and all I think and all I can do, is you. Yeah, you. It's actually your fault. Because, you see, I needed you to like me, to approve of me, to think that what I was doing was great. I needed you not to reject me, not to judge me, and certainly not to talk about me behind my back. And my need of you to approve of me has been the most disempowering element in my life. What I came to realise was this: the person who has disempowered me most is me. And I suspect I'm not alone in being my own greatest saboteur. Psychologists have a name for this need for approval in its most extreme form: codependency. And although that has been my addiction of choice, perhaps it's a little strong for you to relate to. So let's think of it as an approval addiction and consider how it might be impacting your life, limiting it and causing you to kill off your dreams. Drawing from a great body of research that I've done for personal and professional reasons, the most critical feature that I see about an approval addiction is a tendency to live from an external reference point rather than an internal one. And when we can learn to live more internally referenced, we become empowered to own our lives and to take responsibility for creating the outcomes that we really want. So people who live from an external reference have a very adaptive sense of self. Like a chameleon, they morph into whoever you want them to be. They need others to help them feel good and to be able to feel strong in situations. When they make decisions, they're looking to earn other people's approval, and they create dependent or codependent relationships. Up until about 6 years ago, that was my frame, the way that I viewed my world. I worked really hard to be the same as others, from ordering the same meal when we went to a restaurant, to never being the first to offer an opinion or state a preference. For me, difference equaled danger. It was risky. If I was different from you, then you might not approve of me. What I realised was that, in contrast, a person who lives from an internal reference point, they have a strong and separate sense of self. They rely on themselves to meet their own needs, and they're self-confident. They make decisions based on their own values and on the evidence that's available to them. And they create interdependent relationships. Think of someone you admire the most. Did they have a sense of individual agency, that they could take actions and make choices? Did you notice an alignment between what they did with who they were, unfettered by others' expectations? Now, of course, we all like to be approved of, and some level of eternal validation is good for us. But when it becomes an addiction, the guiding principle of our life, then it becomes dangerous and the costs become considerable, and we feel them at personal, organisational and even cultural levels. So at the personal level, what is the cost? Well, difference and failure feel dangerous for approval addicts. We have dreams and aspirations, but it's easier to hide and use self-sabotage strategies. We procrastinate, we hide, and we let our dreams lie dormant. It took me 6 months to put up a Facebook page for my business. Because what if I put myself out there and I failed? Or even worse, what if I succeeded? What would people think? How would they judge me then? Approval addicts often have perfectionistic standards as well. So we never allow ourselves to experience success because no matter how hard and how well we do, it's not quite good enough. And on those rare occasions when we unquestionably do succeed, we attribute it to someone or something else, or we just don't acknowledge it. So we rip ourselves off from getting that boost, that self-confidence, to our self-confidence that feeling success brings. It affects our relationships as well. It's hard to achieve true intimacy when we're not turning up as our authentic selves, but we're focused instead on meeting other people's needs. It's an exhausting way to live. It causes us to settle for less. Our creativity and our brilliance is diluted. We turn up a vanilla version of our true selves. In organisations, our leaders and our teams suffer because of an approval addiction. It's my strong belief that we lead from who we are, not from what we know. We can know the latest theory, we can have learnt from the best leadership gurus, but it's what we believe about ourselves that really matters. If we're motivated by trying to keep others happy, or by earning their approval, or through setting unrealistically high standards, then that will define our leadership and limit our effectiveness. In my work with coaching clients, particularly my women clients, I see a lot of negative outcomes, from procrastination to avoidance of conflict, to reluctance to delegate, to over-collaboration and indecisiveness. This causes us to limit the way that we lead. Leadership, we are experiencing a global leadership crisis right now, aren't we? And I wonder, what if the leadership talent that we need already exists, but people are afraid to put themselves out there? What if that potential leader we need is you? In teams, approval addicts show up as well. We're often unwilling to speak up when our boundaries are invaded, so we allow conflict to fester. We find it really hard to say no, so we take on more and more work, but end up feeling more and more resentful, eventually burning out. We also don't like to share new and untested ideas because what if nobody likes them? But we need those ideas for creativity and innovation. At a cultural level, we're increasingly experiencing pressure to conform and to perform and to meet some externally defined standards. Our elevated benchmarks of brilliant careers, supermodel looks, designer houses, the latest and greatest in material and technological possessions, leave most of us feeling like we just will never make it. A recent study found that 69% of women and 65% of girls are experiencing increased pressure because of media and advertising, to conform to some unrealistic standard of beauty. And it's generating this widespread appearance anxiety. And I don't think it's any different for our boys and young men either. With our always-on social media culture constantly bombarding us with messages about how we should look if we want to be considered okay, it's a lot to live with. And what about the cost when all our effort and focus is directed towards meeting these external measures of success? I wonder what ideas, what innovations, what solutions are left undiscovered to some of our biggest social, environmental, health issues because we are otherwise occupied. So what can we do? Can we actually deal with our approval addiction? Can we change? Can we become more internally referenced? Well, yes, we can. How do we do that? Well, it's one step at a time. First, we have to notice it, to peel back the denial, stare it in the eye, and acknowledge the extent to which an approval addiction could be limiting your life. For some of us, it's not a major deal. It shows up every now and then, but, we can handle it. But for others of us, making this change is a monumental shift. For me, it took a crisis for self-awareness to kick in. About 6 years ago, my perfect-looking world came crumbling down. Everything that I'd invested my identity in was under threat. I was married, a mother, a pastor, financially secure. And although underneath all of that, my life was incredibly challenging, I kind of understood it and I knew how to be in it. And then everything that mattered was stripped away. My marriage was over. My intact family was gone. And everything changed in a moment. All of a sudden, everything that I had hidden from confronted me. All those years of not speaking up, of minimising my hurt, and trying to protect the ones that I loved from experiencing pain confronted me all at once. And in the end, I failed spectacularly at trying to fix somebody else's life, as we always will, and in protecting my loved ones from pain. I was aware at that time that my mental health could be at risk. And somehow I had to turn my business from a hobby into a money-making machine. I was also completing a master's degree. And then there were the teenagers. But that is another story. I felt absolutely and completely flattened. Picture a two-dimensional coyote smeared on the highway, head slightly raised, gasping for air. And Roadrunner atop a steamroller, sort of smiling and waving as he drives away. Beep, beep, that was me. I recognised that my approval addiction had contributed to where I was, and that same way of thinking wasn't going to allow me to rebuild in ways that were healthy for me or my 4 sons. Did I mention they were teenage boys? Yeah. It had to change, and fast. So I want to share with you 3 shifts that I made that were really essential for me to be able to deal with this way of thinking. The first shift was to realise that I own my self-esteem. Nathaniel Brandon, who's an expert in self-esteem, says this: of all the judgments that we pass in life, none are more important than the judgment we pass on ourselves. Our self-esteem is simply the way that we judge our worth. And it's the most important judgment because it determines who we will be and the way that we're going to live our lives. Like many, I had delegated that responsibility to other people to determine my worth. And I knew that if I didn't settle that question for myself, then I would always be asking it and looking to others to provide the answer. I came to understand that my self-esteem was not defined by my performance or my achievements, not by my failures or my mistakes, not by my kindest fans or by my harshest critics. My self-esteem was defined by my humanity. I remember as a child visiting a country hospital to welcome a new cousin. And there were the babies, all lined up in neat little rows, dressed identically, wrapped identically. There were no clues as to their socio-economic background, how much they were wanted, what their IQ was, what kind of future was ahead of them. Yet each possessed amazing intrinsic value just because they existed. That was you once, and that is you now. The second shift I made was to realise that I choose the voices in my head. Imagine a commentary box at a sporting event. The commentator sits in front of this big glass window, which gives them a perfect vantage point to view, to observe, to interpret, and to report on what's happening on the pitch below. And they're often not alone. There are experts in there handing out post-it notes with data and suggestions and analytics, which is all helping to shape what is reported. Our brains are similar. We have voices in our head. And as we struggle to interpret and to understand what's going on in our lives, these voices are often powerfully shaping and interpreting the meaning that we give to the events in our life. What are the voices that are speaking loudest in your head? Are they empowering ones or are they disempowering ones? What are the messages they replay over and over again? What will people think? Who are you to think you've got anything to offer? Don't stand out. Play it safe. How could these messages be impacting your life? Like me, you might need to do an inventory and remove the access pass of some of those voices. But unlike me, you don't have to wait for a crisis. You can take ownership right now of the narrative that's directing your life. And the exciting thing is, you get to create an empowering one. The third shift I made was to become my own best friend. The most important relationship that I will ever have is the one that I have with me, because it determines the quality of every other relationship you will have. Just like I would with any important person or passion, I needed to invest time and energy in my relationship with me. When we're approval addicts, we disconnect from ourselves. So you build that reconnection by building rapport through kindness and acceptance, and by reflecting on who you are. What are your dreams? What's important to you? Learn to trust and honour your feelings, thoughts and preferences instead of judging them or subjugating them to the needs of others. The third shift I made, I already talked about that, didn't I? Was to become my own best friend. At this point, I can hear you say, but doesn't that sound incredibly selfish? I don't want to live an all about me kind of life. That's not what I'm advocating, because service is one of my highest values. What I am suggesting is that you get intentional about who and how you serve, and so that you can come from a place of choice rather than compulsion. When we come from compulsion, we serve because we feel like we have to. We tell ourselves we have no choice, and we end up feeling resentful. When we come from a place of choice, we think about what are our strengths, our passions, and the roles that we've chosen. How can they combine so we add the greatest value? And this is the most empowered way to live. Well, it's not an easy or an instant transition, this stuff, but it is a critical one if we're going to live a fully empowered life. As part of my recovery process, I had to make some really tough decisions. And as a result, I experienced all the things that I feared the most. I was judged, I was rejected, and I was disapproved of in spades. And people did talk about me behind my back. But the curious thing was, I not only survived, I eventually thrived. And a new and truer version of me emerged. And I'm a better mum, facilitator and coach because of it. My relationships are more authentic and much richer. So no matter what has happened in your life, you are your greatest asset and you are a gift to the world. Don't let an approval addiction cause you to squander it. I want to leave you with 3 quick questions. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Who would you be if you didn't imagine the whole world was judging you? And what could you achieve if you really and truly didn't care what other people think?